Madam Clerk, call the roll, please.
Mayor Belt,
Here.
Mayor Camberner,
Here.
Mr. Farrell,
Here.
Ms. Kay,
Here.
Ms. Spencer,
Here.
Ms. Tillerson. Here. Mr. McClung.
And I went out of order again. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Here first. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Citizen comments on agenda items. Guys are separated by this wide gulf here. It's something going on that we need to know about. Moving to the first item of old business. This is second and final reading of ordinance 2025-1. This is our fairly modest adjustment to the off-beach leash off-season, and we're moving it 2 weeks. We discussed this at the last council meeting, and this is time sensitive, which is one of the reasons we're having the special call meeting today. Could I entertain a motion for approval of the ordinance on second and final readings?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
I just have a question, and maybe you answered it with your time sensitive. Does this go in effect in October or February 28th?
This would go into effect on February 28th.
Okay.
Correct, Jim? That's why we're acting on it now before the next March 4th council meeting. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I saw Mr. Jordan walk in. Are we in a position to change the signs? Do we need to change signage so that everybody knows it starts February 28th?
Yeah, we're gonna have to quickly come up with a communication plan as well as some temporary
On the
signs.
changes, yes.
And then the second thing I would say is sort of tangential, but regarding the area past the ocean course to the east. The last time I was there, it's been a while, a month or so, there's only one sign way up close to the driving range. Can we put more signs down through that dune area so it's clear that that whole east end of the beach is dog off limits? Can we do that?
We can.
I mean, it's not even in the tidal zone. I think we can move it 100 or 200 yards toward the water.
So the critical habitat signs
Yep.
that are at the ocean course access, there should be 2 of those. One right at the access and then one on kind of the outer beach, a little, 100 yards further out. We do have a bigger sign that we could put out there. The issue in the past has been that second sign that's further out on the beach tends to get washed out periodically. And so we've had to put that sign back a few times. But yeah, we
2 or
can.
3 signs, even if they're the smaller signs, because the one right by the driving range is you step onto the dunes.
Yeah.
It confuses me, the dogs are not there, but if you walk another 150 yards, can they go down? So anything we can do to improve that would be
Yeah,
great.
we can certainly look into adding an additional sign or 2 there, for
Thank you,
sure.
sir.
I would just note there's also pushback other direction on sign pollution and too much signage on the beach. So we've got to balance those competing considerations. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have more necessarily, but that's an ongoing tension that exists. We are going to, I don't recall if we've ever talked about this as a council meeting, but the subsequent to a meeting that we had with the ARB was raising issues with regard to signage on the beach as well as the trash receptacles, to put together an informal work group comprised of town representatives, ARB representatives, resort representatives, club representatives, and Kika representatives to come up with an overall, if possible, kind of design aesthetic for signage and trash receptacles on the beach. What I indicated to the ARB that public safety and operational efficiency and functionality were the primary considerations. But if we could achieve those in a way which was more aesthetically pleasing, then great. So, we'll take advantage of their design expertise. This came up in the context of, what the staff had done with regard to potential alternative solutions for trash receptacles to allow for easier removal in advance of named storms. Was number one. Number two, about a lot of the signage that was being proposed. And also, we're trying to put this together in the context of revisiting all of beach operations agreements that deal with storage of equipment on the beach, et cetera, that's come up. I guess that's another year, next year. So all those agreements will expire. They all provide for some storage now, and again, do we want some consistency in storage? A long-winded issue, but this is something that'll be ongoing.
And I take your point, Mr. Mayor, but I would be happy to have a discussion with anybody from the ARB when you're talking about living with nature, you're talking about protecting shorebirds, you're talking about potentially writing tickets to dogs, folks who don't have dogs on a leash. Good communication is probably paramount, and it doesn't have to be a big flashing yellow neon sign. It could be tastefully done. So if there's anybody from the ARB who wants to talk about that, I'm happy to have that discussion.
I think that message was generally pretty strongly conveyed, that the operational needs and public safety related issues are paramount importance. Aesthetic considerations will be secondary.
If I could jump in on that also, I've brought to the town before I was a council member, for example, could we have a sign that identifies what a turtle's nest looks like? Because I've seen people actually standing on the nest trying to figure out what it is, and got it took us a year to get it through the ARB for the last signs. I'm like, that shouldn't be a problem for a municipal function.
I would agree with that. Any other questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
The ordinance is approved. The second agenda item is to consider approval of the proposal for the Leisure Trail project on Kiowa Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive. This was deferred from the prior council meeting. Councilmember Berner particularly noted a number of issues related to the bid proposals that have been received by staff, and particularly regarding whether or not they had been appropriately scoped and whether there was real comparability between the two. This doesn't have quite the time sensitivity, but we added this to the special call meeting because we'd already discussed it at the last meeting. In addition, I think there was a general consensus that if we were going to go forward with a Leisure Trail project, it would be desirable to do so sooner rather than later before we get to the holiday season. Do you want to update us, Mr. Gottschalk, on where we stand right now?
Yes, sir. I'm happy to do so. After the last town council meeting, there was a subsequent meeting between Mr. Berner, yourself, Ms. Tillerson, and us to discuss the concerns that Mr. Berner had. We compiled those questions that he had that wanted to be addressed from the contractor, just to make sure that this was an appropriate proposal that we were potentially approving. After we got those questions from Mr. Berner, we definitely went back to the contractor to get those questions answered, and he did provide us answers to those questions that I thought were sufficient, had good explanation to them, and were a justification for the pricing that he had put in his proposal. So at that point, I thought that we had a good, clear understanding of what he proposed and what he bid, and that we were able to move forward. Specifically, a couple of those questions: how much was the Parkway and Beachwalker Drive Leisure Trail going to be raised? The answer to that question was unknown at this point, because there needs to be an elevation determined from the existing conditions and then an as-built elevation shot after construction to see how much the bike path was in fact going to be raised. And then I think another answer to those questions, or another question was about compaction for the subbase. The subbase compaction isn't going to be throughout the entire construction area. That's just going to be where there's full depth patching. We looked at it and saw that there is good rock base rock sub-base underneath the existing bike path right now that looked to be in really good shape. So compaction wasn't going to be something that was going to be a deterrent or a big change order for the project. But the contractor will have the means to do compaction during the construction process out there, as he notified in his response to those questions. So I know that over the weekend, there was also a couple other questions that came up. But at this point, right now, town staff would still like to recommend that proper paving do the design and the construction as per the proposal submitted from them originally last month. But I'd be happy to answer any more questions, or if we need to break this up in any kind of way to make sure that everyone's comfortable with what has been proposed, happy to do so.
First, before we discuss.
Well, we can ask questions, but before there is any discussion, we should have a motion but certainly if there are any questions now for Brian, we can pose those questions. Otherwise, if not, I would simply entertain a motion for approval of the Leisure Trail project.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion.
Yes. What we learned in reviewing the data, we had an explanation as to why there's such a great disparity between the two bids. True Luck had 3 inches of asphalt where proper paving had 2. So if you recall, I raised this issue last time. I said bids for paving work just can't be off by 100% because the cost of paving or asphalt is the same for everybody. And so the answer now is one person was providing 50% more asphalt than the other. So that resolved that issue. With respect to the elevation, there's still a concern over what is in my mind, there's still a concern what's in Proper Paving's contract. Because as Brian indicated, he's going to do an existing conditions survey. But the existing conditions survey goes out there today, tomorrow, next week, is not going to show you the depth of the water or the flooding that we're trying to mitigate. So the issue with respect to how much you're going to raise the path to mitigate the flooding is unknown, and it's also still unknown. How much did he include in his bid? Or is he going to set us up for a change order? So we don't know if he has 1 inch, 6 inches, 1 foot, 2 feet, or whatever in his bid for raising the bike path there. We still don't know that. And I suspect that's going to be a change order. Now, the mayor indicated that, there's another issue. When I went out there with Brian to look at the bike path, the slope of the bike path has already degraded and started to erode away, the slope. And it's to the point that you can actually see the subbase from a side view or from a profile view. That's a big deal only because we observed that parts of the bike path paving, the existing bike path paving, has already started to crumble and fall away down the slope. So you can't compact out to the limit. From an engineering perspective, you can't compact out to the edge. It just never works, and because you can't get the compaction of the subsurface soils because of the slope is exposed there. So that area has to be addressed to repair what's already been lost for the slope, or we're going to have a narrower bike path that will continue to fail. Now, the mayor indicated that he thought it would be good to just do the paving at Beachwalker Drive, which is okay, and then we can deal with this part a little bit later because the area at Beachwalker Drive doesn't need the elevation raised. So the issue I had is we don't know how much fill is in the bid goes away. I'm okay with that, doing the Keo Island Parkway portion later, but the only thing I wanted to alert town council to is The scope for this project was 24,000 square feet for the two bike path locations. And that's what the bidder bid on. If you only have the Beach Walker Drive portion, it's only going to be a 5,600 square foot project, which is less than a quarter, or less than 25% of the overall plan scope at the beginning when the RFP was solicited. It's quite possible Proper Paving can request a change or an increase in his unit rates because the scope of the project is so much smaller. And I know that's customarily done in construction, as I've had to deal with this before. But I'm alerting you, if we approve it, he may come back and ask for different rates because the scope of the project is so much smaller now. I just want to get that out there. And so we haven't had the opportunity for Proper Paving to come back and say what he would do for a smaller project.
If I may.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not speaking from an engineering perspective, but I am speaking from a safety perspective. Sunday morning, it was a deluge. And we left the island and came back after the deluge had stopped, but there was still so much rain on the portion of the trail that gets between Cacique and the circle. And there were a couple of clearly advanced bikers, helmets, gear, all of it, who had to stop and were taking their bikes out onto the road because the bike path was so seriously flooded. So I'm really concerned about the safety piece of this. I mean, these were bikers who knew what they were doing. These were not just casual recreational people. And I know that there may be additional cost, but I would rather, from my own perspective, I'd rather see the project move forward, and if we have to bear additional cost, we do. But let's get it going.
I'm glad you brought that up. I saw people walking on Keel Island Parkway Sunday, too.
Yeah, that does create a serious safety issue. And if we have to modify the project, so be it, but let's make safety the primary concern.
I would also add, first, I appreciate Mr. Berner slowing us down, making sure we've dotted our i's and crossing our
totally
t's.
agree.
Yes, thank you.
And I think that's very important. And I appreciate the time he spent doing the extra work, going out and looking at the project. From my standpoint, there's such a difference in the bid that if there is a change order, we need extra fill, we need compaction, if we need to put a wooden border so we don't get erosion of the path, that type of change order, I think, is well within the scope of what we should be doing from a safety standpoint and from a protection and longevity of the project. And the difference in cost is still so great that I think we're still going to be better off at the end of the day with proper paving. If we go to 2 to 3 inches, my quick math says that's another $35,000. So we could even do that, and it's still way less than True Luck. So I think I would be happy to approve this, understanding we might get a change order for more fill or more border protection of that, and deal with that and get this project moving before the holidays. But I do appreciate all the work that everybody's done in making sure we understand what this bid is. So I would suggest that we move forward with this, understanding there might be a change order from the field notice.
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine with all that. I wanted everybody to go in with their eyes wide open. I agree with what Madeline said. From a safety perspective, we should be moving forward now. But, it's going to cost more, and I'm okay with that.
A couple of observations. I want to echo the comments from fellow council members with regard to the rigor which Councilmember Berner applied to this process appropriately. So we certainly could have done a better job at the outset in identifying whether or not the two bids were apples to apples. That we've undertaken that process, and now better apples to apples, we understand that there is not quite the wide gulf that was first evident, But nonetheless, as Councilmember Farrell has noted, the proper paving bid would still come in well under the True Luck bid, and we have some understanding of why that might be the case. The one thing I would observe about the portion of KIP which surprised me is I went back and went the length of KIP after the rainstorm, about 2 hours after the rainstorm. All the water had gone away in the most problematic portion of what has been the most problematic portion of the trail between Cacique and the Circle, which surprised me. I wonder whether it's simply a low area where the water piles up, but because we addressed drainage, how many months ago now? That was a few months ago. That at least now it does drain, where before it didn't drain. It may drain slowly. Not to say we shouldn't rectify it. There was still water standing on a portion, although not particularly deep, but covering the entirety of the trail between Cacique or Old Cedar Lane and the bridge inbound. You could tell, though, it was no more than an inch deep or something. I don't think it'd be any issue somebody riding through that, but nonetheless, there was standing water. But I just wanted to observe that I went back intentionally after the fact, and apparently our drainage efforts had worked, but it's still a low area that's going to allow water to accumulate at least for a period of time.
So I have a follow-up question on that, because I'm not sure the location where Madeline saw the flooding is the same location where the drainage work was done by you. Yeah, so what I'm saying, we may be going through all this work, and the problem area that Madeline saw may not be included in our scope.
Where I saw us between Cacique and the bridge. Right at the bend before the bridge, coming from Cacique.
That's not in our scope of work.
That's not in our scope of work. Where there were people, I believe, because you said it was between the Circle and Cacique.
Yes.
And that's where we had a significant amount of water retention of some depth for a long period of time. That's what led to the drainage clearing efforts, because all that water was the reason why this first came up in the first originally. But before undertaking this proposal, we undertook some drainage work, which again appears to have addressed the problem of water staying there for a period of time. It still accumulates there at a heavy rainstorm before it dissipates. But,
All right,
so
so
we
what-
still need to do the work at some point in time to raise that area.
Yeah, well, so we're in a dilemma. So this whole issue started because we wanted to prevent or take care of the flooding that you guys all saw this last weekend. But we don't have data. How deep is the water? How much does it have to be raised? Where it is? So, I'll have to sit down with you, Madeline. So perhaps you can have a good recollection, and we can look on a map to see if it coincides with the work that's in the current scope or not. I'd hate to go through this entire project and announce to the town or the community that we've addressed the flooding, and then all of a sudden it comes back again in a different spot. That would be kind of embarrassing.
I'm trying to remember, maybe it was at Ways and Means we had this conversation, but we had talked about appending this contract when awarded for that bend right before the bridge coming from Cacique.
We did. Ways and Means had recommended council. So what was before council was the approval of the proper paving project with ability of the mayor to
Right, okay.
approve a change order up to $30,000. But that was more for the out of scope work if we
Right.
decided to add that rather than any change orders related to the in-scope work.
And I suspect if bikers are walking around onto the road, that water is
It's several inches.
even
It
more
was-
than
it
that,
was-
I
yes.
suspect.
And I can tell you, it was, so you leave the Circle, you pull onto the drive, it was only a couple hundred yards beyond that.
But I'm thinking it must be at least a foot deep.
The depth, I didn't get out and measure,
I understand, no, of course not.
but it
is like
looked to
that.
be close to a foot deep.
So
Yeah, I
That's
biked
not
through
in
it.
this proposal, that kind
Yeah,
of,
well,
I'm not saying not to do it, believe me, I'm just keeping our eyes open. That's not in this proposal.
So I would suggest there are two paths we could go down, or two leisure trails we could go down. One is to separate this, this project into two parts. One, go ahead with the beach walker drive, since the portion, which is much smaller, doesn't raise as many issues, and do that now. And then we could either do, go out and, if proper paving's willing to do the smaller scale only now, then potentially redo the bid for the entirety of the KIP portion to the bridge, since right now, an area that floods is not within scope, get better specs,
Well,
and then
we-
do that this fall.
All right, well, to me, I'm kind of torn. The whole idea was to get this taken care of now before the summer season.
Yep.
I'm not as concerned, to be honest, with the beach walker part. I know that's in your backyard, and I know it has roots popping up and such, but to mitigate the flooding and the safety issue that Madeline discussed at the very beginning, people getting on the roadway, I think the urgency is now, not waiting for the
Okay.
fall.
I agree with that.
We just need to have better design information so we can make sure we're getting fixed what has to be fixed.
And just one last piece. Again, no engineering hat here, but it looked to me that it was a significant construction project. So I don't think this bid is, well, obviously it's out of the scope, but I think we might be looking at a lot more money to if we're elevating a large stretch of the bike trail.
It's a lake there. It's a lake there. I'm sure you all have seen it. I mean, I've tried to bike through it.
Yes.
You can't get through it. It's up to your ankles.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, there's survey in here, so they're going to survey the existing surface, and I think that'll identify where the problems are. And this is just creating kind of a level bike path above the water levels with some slopes so water doesn't stand, rather than building something that is like a pool. I don't think this is, personally, I don't think this is rocket science. It's going to be surveying. We're going to have to bring in fill, compact it a little bit, and then repave it. So I think these guys can solve this problem pretty easy and identify where the problems are.
Yeah,
So
that's what they do.
I'm still thinking we should move forward.
Well, I do want to move forward with it. I'm just, the survey, though, if they go out and survey, they're not going to see how much to raise it because they don't know what the water depth level is. That's the issue. So
So can I would hope that they would say, okay, well, we can identify, all of us could walk out and say, this is above the flood level, and down here's above the flood level, and take those 2 points and say, just make it that level all the way across, and it's
Right.
going to raise the bottom. I
That
think we
has
can
to be-
see where the flooding is.
that has to be us. We can't leave that up to the contractor.
I've got photos and documentation about previous flooding events that pretty well depict the conditions out there when it's really
Well,
flooded.
one suggestion is, we're supposed to have
Right.
fairly heavy rains tomorrow,
True.
so we can go back out and take pictures tomorrow.
So is the proposal that we're considering does that include giving the mayor the discretion to add the Key Island Parkway piece that's not in scope right now? That, just like we talked about last month?
Well, that was what was before council the last time.
I don't think we can do that because your change order authority, this is going to be a rather big change order. This is going to be outside of your ability to approve.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by
This is
that.
going to be a $50,000 change.
Okay, well, so you could amend what was before the council is approval of the Ways and Means Committee recommendation, which include change order authority up to $30,000. We can amend that if you want to do so. Otherwise, they'd have to come back. If it exceeds that, you don't even have to accept what the Ways and Means Committee recommended. If they want to come back and limit it to that, and if there's a change order greater than that, need to bring it back to council.
All right, so look, I'm ready to move forward with this. I have no problem with what, again, eyes wide open. We're going to be addressing this in a piecemeal fashion, which always costs more. And I'm personally okay with that, because I really want to get this done. but it's going to be sizable. It's not going to be nickels and dimes. It's going to be 50,000 or more. We take care of all the flooding on the Parkway.
And I think that's money well spent.
So what, do we need to make an amendment then?
Well, no, what was before, if it's right now, I can, without coming back to council, what was before the council was approval of a project in the, for $130,000.
Plus 30.
That was the proper paving proposal. We recognize that there are some additional costs that were not included in that. For example, just the flaggers at $1,500 a week or something like that a day, as well as the 2 versus 3 inches. But what we found out from Kika is they just do 2 inches on there, so we don't necessarily need to go to 3.
2 inches is standard.
Okay, 2 inches is standard, so that's fine within proper pavings. But what was not within proper pavings, the scope of work, was addressing, which would only involve a couple hundred feet, if that, maybe 100 feet, of the leisure trail between Cacique, Old Cedar Lane, and the bridge. The floods that may need to be raised very modestly. Because,
All right, so what,
and so now, but that's all that was allowed for. If there'd been any other change orders, they would have been subject to our regular procurement processes to approval. Now, we can either just leave it at that, or we can raise that amount.
all right, so the only thing that I asked Brian, that you and/or me, I don't mind the "and" part, we need to go out and you need to have a couple spray paint cans available. I understand the ground may be wet, we'll have to figure out what to do. But we need to go out there and spray the limits of where the ponding or the flooding is.
Absolutely. We can certainly do that.
And the only reason I'm picking at the dollar amount is Councilmember Berner, who knows his stuff on this, is thinking it's 50. So I don't want to have another emergency council meeting, because I think we're all agreeing with the urgency or a flag on the play. So if the number needs to be 50, then maybe we should amend it to 50.
That your, is that a motion?
I'll move for that.
Okay, you're moving to amend the Ways and Means Committee recommendation to approve the contract with an additional, with the mayor having the authorization to approve change orders up in an amount up to $50,000.
That's what I'm moving.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay,
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
On the amended motion on the approval of the contract as amended, all in favor?
Aye.
It's approved. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Brian, we have to have an appointment tomorrow. At some point.
What are you doing this afternoon?
Again,
we're not gonna
it's
see
going to
the- we're not
be,
gonna see
we're
the
supposed to
ponding
get a
today.
lot of rain tomorrow, so we can also evaluate.
tomorrow.
what the-
We'll mark the ponding boundaries for sure after the rain tomorrow.
Okay.
While we're on the leisure trail, if I can just add something that wasn't germane to this necessarily. You drive this too, Mr. Mayor. Right where you stop on Beach Walker before you turn onto Keel Isle Parkway at the gate. Maybe we should explore the landscaping. I love the landscaping there, but it's very hard to see bikers coming out of the gate. We should take a look at that. When you look to the right, if you're exiting Beach Walker Drive onto Keel Island Parkway, the palm fronds.
Oh, yes, I've noticed the same thing. We just need to work with our landscaper. Those need to just be taken down and something lower put
Or
there.
moved or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm actively looking and I don't see people.
Moving on to new business, this is to consider approval of the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue one-year contract extension for code enforcement services. Just some context. We had previously approved at the last council meeting extension of the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue Beach Patrol contract. This is a separate agreement in the amount of approximately $389,000 that applies only to code enforcement services and only evening code enforcement services, and what has heretofore been primarily focused on short-term rental compliance. The reason we're entertaining this at special call is because the contract by its terms expires February 28th prior to the next council meeting. I'd had some conversations, Stephanie and I did, with Berry Island Ocean Rescue, with Sans and Rob. What is before council is a proposed one-year extension per the term of the contract with some very, very minor modifications. Adjusting the coverage hours by an hour, moving them up an hour each day, and shifting the focus so it's not really only on short-term rental compliance. I'm happy to discuss, provide a little bit more background and context on that. But this was also, we sat down and I had conversations with a couple of you, what we want as a town, our code enforcement priorities to be, how those are best accomplished, in-house or outsourced. There are a couple of other issues that have arisen. One of which is, I don't know if you're aware, but there's been some recent litigation. There's a class action lawsuit that was filed by a property owner in Folly Beach and another one in Isle of Palms. And they filed a class action suit against both municipalities who are both using the same outsourced parking enforcement service provider. They have a contract with a company that does all the parking enforcement, issues citations, collects revenues, and there's a revenue sharing agreement pursuant to that. So there's a class action lawsuit filed, and the basis of the lawsuit was in part reference to a Attorney General's opinion from last fall, in which it stated pretty categorically that parking enforcement constitutes the exercise of a police power, municipal police power, and that could not be delegated to a third party. The only reason I bring that up is Attorney General opinion is not law. It's simply an opinion, and we have a case pending. But if it was taken to its logical exclusion, any exercise of the police powers could not be delegated to a third party, which would include code enforcement. So we're considering this contract in the context of what may be a changed legal environment at some point in time, depending on how that case is resolved. But this has been a long-standing issue. But right now, we can continue with this. But that's just a little background and context. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, and we also obviously have Saz and Rob here. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion for approval, and then we can discuss the matter.
Well, I have no problem with what we're trying to do. And I'm only bringing this up. I feel like I'm you from last year before you were mayor. When I was running projects and we wanted to extend contracts, the attorneys who I was working with at that time banged into my head that when you extend an existing agreement, you can't change the terms. So I'm just want to make sure we're not making an error here. He said you can do this with a new award, but we're changing the hours of service, which is a change of the terms. Yeah. And what was banged into my head is you can't do that with an extension.
You can do that only if both parties agree to that.
No, I was told you can't change any terms in an extension. You're extending the existing terms. The motion is to extend the current contract as would be amended. That's the motion. That's the whole point. I'm just trying to make sure we don't, I was told that we can't, and I'm not the attorney, but I'm raising this, it's my understanding when you extend an existing contract, you cannot change any terms in that existing contract.
I've never heard of such a concept.
Okay, I have many, I'm just bringing it up. So I don't have any problem with it, I just want to make sure we're doing it correctly.
Yeah, this would be news to me too, because in the financial markets, you
change contracts all the time, specifically with extensions. And as long as both parties agree,
Because, I mean,
the
quite
effect is a
frankly,
new contract.
Yeah,
if the effect
we
is.
can say, okay, we're not going to renew the contract, and the contract simply expires, or we can say we're willing to renew the contract on these revised terms, and either the other party agrees or they don't.
Right. That would then be a new contract. And I wish Mac was here, because I wanted to get him to chime in.
I think the difference is you can't, unilaterally, you can't do it. If both parties agree, both parties can agree to anything. So I think that might be the difference.
And as far as I'm concerned, the legal risk here is minimal, and I'm willing to accept that.
The broader issue, I'd entertain a motion for approval of the contract extension as proposed to be amended.
So move.
Second.
Discussion, a little additional context here. Part of, express a little bit of frustration, and they can certainly address this, because this contract had been solely for, primarily, not solely, but primarily for evening or nighttime code enforcement focused on short-term rentals, which basically is parking violations and bikes and beach paraphernalia left out overnight. One of the provisions says dawn to dusk, the other says overnight. And so at some point in time, you figure out that if it's 9, 10, 11 o'clock midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, it's overnight. And the issue is a couple of things. One is these guys have done a pretty good job, as they told me, kind of put themselves out of business because there are many, many fewer violations of the short-term rental ordinances than had been in the past. Plus, we've just done a better job as a community in communicating with the property management companies and others. Plus, all the violations they do cite now, they're actually not violations, they're primarily warnings. And there was less emphasis on some of the other municipal code enforcement activities. The other issue related to this is cost. Now, I've done the kind of the rough math on this. This works out to about $190,000 per FTE, the equivalent. Now, that's obviously considerably more than it would cost us to hire additional code enforcement officers. Probably fully loaded, we'd be somewhere between, 100 and 120. So it is more than that, but this includes training, this includes the supervision, this includes vehicles, et cetera. So the gap isn't as wide as the numbers would necessarily suggest. Plus, one needs to recognize that these are unusual hours. It includes weekends, it's 24/7, it includes night. So I was prepared to, move forward with this one more year as we continue to evaluate the efficacy of this contract as well as what we want to do from an administration standpoint with regard to code enforcement, as we have a new code enforcement officer coming on soon. So this gives us a year to evaluate that. So I am recommending that we move forward with this contract. I did have a conversation with the leadership of Barrier Island Ocean Rescue, who's here in the room. And what I was hoping we could achieve was some additional flexibility in staffing. It wasn't clear to me that we necessarily needed 2 code enforcement officers at night. All the time. And was there some flexibility to shift some of those hours to, at their discretion, to the day, for example, or onto the beach, where there's probably a greater need. They've indicated that they don't have that flexibility. That's disappointing to me. And that's something we need to look at next year. But what we have right now is what was essentially agreed to in terms of a limited change in scope. In this contract right now. So again, moving it up a little bit more earlier in the 1 hour earlier in the day where there's more people around, more activity between 4 and 5 o'clock than there is between midnight and 1 a.m. And again, less of a singular focus on short-term rental compliance with regard to general ordinance compliance, which could include, for example, being out on the beach in the evening and monitoring light ordinance for benefit of turtle patrol, et cetera. So anyway, that's where we are. And so if there are any other questions or comments, and obviously Saz and Rob are here to answer any questions.
So I have a question about, I'm assuming it's Kika has the truck that goes around with the green lights on it. That's not you guys, right?
That's not us, no, sir.
Do you guys coordinate with Kika, with that community patrol? If they see bikes on the street at night, do they call you, or what's your coordination with Kika?
It honestly depends on who's supervising that day, who's in the gate, depending on whether or not they're one of the ones that we've known for a number of years that want to communicate with us directly. There's a little bit higher turnover with gate staff than there would be, than there is with us. So if they don't know to call us, they won't, depending on who that patrol unit is and who's supervising. Anytime we see something that we think they should know about or they think they can't handle without help, we will call each other. So one of those things is parking. Parking violations are Kika's #1 thing. We don't care about parking unless it's a short-term rental. We don't have a parking ordinance or anything behind the gate. So we'll pass those along. We'll pass, if we see contractors working past 7, things like that are not ordinance violations, but are Kika covenant violations, we will communicate those back and forth. But there's not a routine. We don't coordinate patrols with them, mostly because our peak patrol time is when they are not patrolling. They stop around, depending on the staffing, they stop around dark and don't pick up patrols again until after midnight, so that they can do lunch and dinner for all their gate staff, things like that.
And then the other part is, especially behind the second gate, do you have a map, or do you know where short-term rentals occur, or do you just drive all the streets, or how does that work?
We use, and that's part of this presentation, you'll see the heat maps that we put in there for where our patrols go. So what we'll do is random. We want to make sure it's as random as possible. And to that end, the enforcement officer, when they come on duty, they can look and see everywhere that the unit the day before has patrolled. So we don't have a map per se. We do have trouble areas. Anything that's generated a complaint that week, we will make sure we go back there, that the complaint has been resolved and stays resolved. But we randomize our patrols as much as possible, and we tag everywhere we patrol. So we know with GPS coordinates where we've been recently. So if we say, hey, we spent a lot of time in Ocean Park looking for coyotes this week, we need to go back up and hit like Arrowhead and Bellmead and those streets that we haven't been on this week. That's how they'll plan those out.
Thank you.
And that actually, Councilmember Farrell raises one good issue, and part of the conversation is, most of the short-term rental properties are not, the vast majority of them are pretty well located in West Beach. Right. In fact, there are very, very few that are on the eastern end of the island. But from a code enforcement perspective, there are other issues, and what we would want to try to encourage is some greater visibility of the town, and we hope Kika as well, in terms of patrols across the island in the evenings.
Sas, could you quickly go through your presentation, or
If
did you
you
want
guys,
to?
I don't want to keep you here if you don't want to, but one
Yeah, I
of the
don't know
things that we did was put this together after the retreat. Some of it is memorializing the history of how we got to where we are with Bear Island Ocean Rescue and the short-term rental contract, and then a little bit of a deeper dive into what we actually do during the evening. And if I'm correct, Ms. Kay, I think you're the only one that's been a full-time resident since before 2020. Is that correct? Everybody else is
I
after?
don't know about everybody else's status, but yes, I
I'm
have.
as 2020.
So that's where some of that history might be helpful. For
How long is the presentation?
I can go 5 minutes.
Well, I'd find it very interesting, but I know we have a stop time at 10. So do we
Oh.
have anything else we need to get done in the next 12 minutes? Anybody else want to see it?
We can certainly.
As long as we start the 10
offline.
o'clock
We
meeting.
can run through it as quickly as you can.
You sure?
And I have one other question while you're pulling this up. So somebody asked me this question, I'll ask you the question. How much of your cost, like how many miles a year do your vehicles drive in total?
We rotate them. So
Well, let me tell you where I'm going.
yeah.
So if you're driving de minimis miles, then gas prices going down probably don't have a big impact. But if you're driving a lot, so do gas prices going down 20 or 30 cents a gallon as they've done affect your budget that much, or is it de minimis?
That's a
How
question
many
for Rob
miles
to
do you
answer.
drive?
About 10,000 a year per vehicle. And so
Divide that by 20 is 500 times 20 cents is,
Right, and so I guess.
$100, okay.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the things that we try to build into the budget over the duration of the terms of the contract. When we put the price in, we are averse to coming back and asking for more money, so we try to, so it helps,
$100
but,
is fine. I
yeah.
can go with, I'll ask the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So very quickly,
I think we
Rob,
know you guys, so
Yep,
we,
so the-
long history.
long history. This is the timeline for Barry Island Ocean Rescue. We started with the town doing beach patrol in 2009, had a 3-year emergency contract after the former contractor had been let go or quit. We're not sure which, or I can't remember which. Renewed in 2012, got jet skis. 2015 became USLA certified. 2017 renewed. 2019, we became the first and only year-round USLA advanced agency in South Carolina and got the code enforcement contract for after hours. In 2020, we earned our basic life support designation through DHEC. And we're the only ones on the eastern seaboard, I believe, that do that as a lifeguard agency. And then we renewed in 2022, kept both contracts separate, and then in 23 got our advanced life support accreditation, and also incorporated the drone as additional assets. Levels of response, you can read this on your own. This is showing who is involved on Kiowa and what their level of response is. So that's the distinction between BLS, ALS, and then everybody else. Our staff requirements, this is something we talked about with the mayor about who does code enforcement. The only people who are allowed to do code enforcement for us at night are those that have demonstrated accountability on the beach during the day when there is much more supervision and much more oversight available. This is word for word the bullet points from the scope of work from our current contract. You can see it prioritizes short-term rentals. When this contract was initiated in 2020, the town was unaware of any of the other enforcement activity that happened at night because no one was doing it. So all of the other numbers that we track came after that. This is just the history of the short-term rental enforcement laws, and the permit fees were designed to pay for that. This shows our effectiveness, and this is one of those times where do you let up on the enforcement, or do you keep going and see if you can keep it that low? But those of you that were here in 2020 and prior may remember kind of what the island looked like versus what it looks like now. This is our patrol activity. This is almost 20,000 patrols. So you can see we are concentrated really heavily in the short-term rental area, but also out in Ocean Park, a little bit down Falcon Point, and then plenty of fresh fields as well. These are incidents only, so these are not short-term rentals. This is just everything else and where they occur. This is just enforcement. So this one would include wildlife, medical, things like that. This one is just enforcement, which would include short-term rentals. So you see hotspots wherever there's a large rental community. Wildlife is all over, but primarily the beach, because we're the ones with the resources to go to the beach to respond to those. Lots of turtles, coyotes, and things of that nature.
What would be a call where you'd have a turtle response?
So, hey, there's 50 people gathered around a turtle laying eggs right now. So we will go and push the crowd back and monitor for lights and things like that. Typically, those are things we find by patrolling, by walking down boardwalks. We'll see a concentrated group of lights or hear shouting a lot of the times. And we'll go and handle whatever that issue is. So most of what we do is officer initiated, not call initiated, because we're constantly patrolling. That's the idea. That's the model. Medical response, you can see again, primarily on the beach because that's our bailiwick. That's where we are. These are just some 4-year results of some of the more common categories that we deal with. STRs, obviously, we talked about. Personal article storage is the ordinance that applies to homeowners that are not rentals, meaning even as a homeowner that doesn't rent your house out, you can't leave your towels out over your railing. There is a town ordinance for that. It's also a KICA rule, but we do send warning letters. Disturbing the peace, you can see how far that dropped. Underage drinking, we pretty much killed that one. And then fire and fireworks, I think the word is out that if you bring fireworks, they get taken away. So right now, we're 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. This contract would be a shift to 4 p.m. to midnight. We've got our log patrols. We also have a dedicated STR hotline, a direct patrol phone, and we are dispatched by 911 for medical and rescue calls. Peak season versus off-season staffing, so 2 and 1. some reasons there for Y2 versus Y1, and it's really just based on activity. So we took out all of the short-term rental and personal article storage activity, so this is just everything else that we do to show which hour of the day it happens in. So we're not here before 5, but there still is some tracked activity before 5 o'clock. And you can see most of what we do happens between 8 o'clock and midnight. And that's really when people are done with dinner, they're out walking the beach. That's when there's more activity for us in that time period. To the mayor's point, there's more overall island activity between 4 and 5 as there is between midnight and 1. But there's, I think, more enforcement activity that happens between that 8 and midnight window. We do have our Watchtower service program that tracks all of our statistics. You can dig as deep as you would like to dig. Everything is GPS tagged. Everything has it's our daily shift logs. It tracks all our incidents. It's a big button format. So on our computers that are mounted in the truck, so you just tap the screen and you can say, hey, it's an enforcement, it's a written warning, and it's for a leash law. And then it's tracked and GPS tagged. This software is also under continuous development with us. We've got one of the programmers that works on our team as well. But we recently introduced this to town staff during the day to start to use, so we can start to tag things back and forth and make it a little bit easier to say, hey, did you check this job site? I found an overflowing dumpster, things like that for those follow-up requests that we have that need to be handled during the day, or vice versa when they need us to handle at night or go recheck something. It also has a public-facing website that we are not using yet. Really more appropriate for the beach patrol side, because if we have a bunch of stingray stings somewhere, we can actually tag it and the public can log in and look and say, hey, I don't want to go to Boardwalk 27 today, or whatever it might be. We also use CitizenServe. This is the town's database. This is how we track and really what's helped those STR violations come down so quickly, because every authorized property manager has to sign saying that they are in charge of that property. So we send them the picture from right out front at, as it's happening. And that's a written warning. If they get enough written warnings, they get a ticket. If they get 3 guilty verdicts, their license is taken away. And we've only had to do that a couple of times, and it's been wildly effective.
So you actually know, but property by property, short-term rental property by property, which property manager has that house?
We have to look it up, but it's in the system.
But it's there.
Yes, ma'am. And we have a direct, it's by ordinance, they have a local contact phone that they have to either answer or call us back within 2 hours, or that's a separate ticket. So if it's something that needs handling right then, like there's a dog barking on the back porch and nobody's home, we have a number and somebody's supposed to handle it. Yep, sorry. All right, so the other thing, weather events, we're here for that. The tornado that happened earlier this year, the snow, hurricane and tidal events, we stay for that. And then this is just the drone. And so this is the picture we talked about at the retreat of Sandy Point on 4th of July.
Oh.
We also have access to the CAD, which is the EMS dispatch system. And that's through our DHEC accreditation. And we also handle whatever wildlife incidents pop up after hours when Jim and his team are not here. But we do that in coordination with Jim and with his training and blessing. See the coyote on the right? That's the best picture we've gotten so far of a live coyote. And I'll stop there.
That's a great picture.
Thank you, Saz.
Very
And
helpful.
I'll state for the public record, as I stated to them privately, I have high respect for the level of professionalism provided by Barrier Island Ocean Rescue. I think they do a good job. Part of the issue is going to be working with them, which you guys had indicated you're willing to do, or working with the town in terms of kind of priorities to focus on. The one thing about it certainly understand short-term rental compliance issues were prevalent 5 years or so ago, less so now for a number of reasons, in part because you guys have done a good job. But I've had conversations with KICA representatives, KICA board members, and looking at the KICA rules and regulations. The only thing that's unique to short-term rental compliance relative to KICA regulations is really the number of vehicles allowed with regard to a short-term rental property.
It's also who you cite. Because Kika can't cite the property manager, they can only cite the homeowner.
Right, cite the homeowner, but that's the only, everything else, there's overlapping.
Correct.
Responsibility. With regard to short-term rental compliance, where it becomes important for Barry Island code enforcement is to actually have a town presence in the evenings and at night, patrolling the island, lighting-related issues. There are different, we have different regulations than Kika does, so they do have ones with regard to lighting as well. We both have nuisance provisions, we both have quiet hours, and we also, of course, have off-duty contract to provide CCSO coverage. So our goal is to be able to deploy your team, and generally under your direction, but if we think there's a particular area to focus on, separate from simply short-term rental compliance, you guys are willing to do that?
Always.
Yeah. I think we have a motion. Any further discussion or questions? A motion, we have a motion on the table to approve the extension of the contract as amended. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Councilmember comments. Councilmember Berner.
No, thank you.
Member Kay.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Farrell.
No, sir.
Thanks.
I would just simply note, put on everybody's radar screen, that I anticipate that the meeting, council meeting in 2 weeks from today is going to be a fairly heavy agenda. There's going to be a lot that we will be considering, and we'll try to get as much information to you in as far in advance as we can, but matters that may be before the council in 2 weeks include a new procurement ordinance that we're working on with the town attorney right now to address some of these issues that we've discussed before. A new encroachment permit ordinance. We don't actually have any specific encroachment permitting authority right now. The landscape contract that was deferred previously, there have been some issues related to that. New HR policies update, revisions to the HR's manual. I think charitable grants is going to be in the March? April, okay. The resiliency charter, which I hope would not be very controversial at this point in time. We're starting the short-term budget process. We may have some at least presentations for Ways and Means in March, all of council. And I don't know where we are yet, as we'll get further changes to the beach management ordinance and the dog leash rules, but that's still sitting out there as well. Plus, there's going to be some stuff that's likely to be coming from the Planning Commission at some point in time as well. So it's going to be a busy next couple. A very modest beach operations agreement with tidal trails. And coastal expeditions, if we can get those tightened up. Anyway. Lot on our plate in the next month or two. Citizen comments? None? Then we are adjourned.